We received the agenda. We thought we would try something new and not have times on the agenda. We know what time we start, we know what time we end, and I think just being able to be fluid and kind of go where there's interest, and then think about at some point we look and we decide kind of where we want to be and where we want to go, so that we aren't necessarily pressured for time in a like we're gonna stop this right now in the middle of something really important to move on to something else, and that feels a little bit unfinished. So it can be a little unnerving for those who really like we've got a set and solid time to do things. So we'll give it a shot and see, but we will check in. We'll try to get to everything we have on our agenda. You have a question?
For those who are just joining for subcommittee meetings, should we still tell them 1 o'clock?
Yes, so the main part of the meeting. Yes, the main part of the meeting.
Thank you.
The time that we have between 10 and noon is a part that will be really fluid and not kind of, we're gonna go 10 to 10:15 for this and for that. But then the agenda, the time frame for subcommittees, thank you for clarifying that, Martha. The time frame for subcommittees will stay as it is. So I'm thinking about the main part of the meeting. So we'll give it a shot and we'll see how it feels. We'll check in and see how it feels for people to structure it this way, and then we'll keep kind of going and moving from there. So the way that it's written up here is not necessarily the flow of the meeting. We just kind of have the topics together. We are going to start with our rates update and discussion. So we'll start there and then move from that into kind of expansion. And then we'll kind of group ourselves as we make our way down. So first up on topic is our HVAC, it's not HVAC, is our HVSA kind of rates update and discussion. And Renee's gonna lead that and you're to support.
Thank you. So what we decided, or what I decided to do or propose doing today, was give you an abbreviated version of one of the more recent engagement sessions that we did. And so like those of you who are to review, you can see the same deck of slides. But so what I'm going to show you is a deck of slides that's specific to one of our program models that was released. I'm taking some of the slides out, but can everybody hear me on the Zoom? I usually have a good voice, so anyway, it's so that's what this is. So it's not, and then if there's any questions kind of in the broader scheme of progress and things like that, we can certainly answer those. And apparently I'm now the rates expert at DCRI, so take that with a grain of salt. So if we're going to go to the next slide, so the goal of what we're going to try to do today is share with you the rate and payment methodology. And then there's a really brief set of slides talking about how we approach budget and contract development with the programs, and then really one slide only on program reporting changes. So go to the next slide. What we've tried to do in all of our work around rates is continue to have these 3 questions in front of us as we're doing the planning. And I'm not sure I have to read the questions, but it's really around making sure we're just asking these questions all the time, not always having answers, but wanting to make sure we're taking into consideration communities who've been marginalized by typical policies and government processes, and also try, we really want to make sure that all communities, our BIPOC-led organizations, our rural communities are not disproportionately impacted negatively by this work. What we always do also is, that's fine that you moved to this, is we have opportunity for everyone who participates to offer input in a what do you call it when you can't see their name, anonymous. So we offer a Menti board specific to each of the engagement sessions. It's a little bit disingenuous when there's only one agency that is part of that model, but they at least have an opportunity if there's multiple people for them to give their input. And it's also an opportunity in between engagement sessions. If things come up, they can write it in there as well, although we're always available to respond to issues. So the rate, this slide here talks about the rate payment framework. If you're in LAA, you've seen this a million times now. The payment, the methodology in creating a rate payment encompasses basically 4 buckets of cost data. The first being the most important is personnel costs, really who does the work, how much they cost. So what does it take to implement a home visiting model specific to that model. In terms of staffing, what are the qualifications, and then how are those people paid? The next section, or I'm going to go into each one of these boxes in a little bit more detail, but it's like what is the work? What's the workload? What does that cost? Are there costs associated with the work that may or may not be personnel? We all know that in the background, every organization that's implementing a program has infrastructure costs as well as other operations costs that are absolutely 100% necessary in order to deliver that service. They may not be apparent to the person who's receiving the service, but they're certainly important in order to make that service happen, and that's where the operations costs come in. And then the final box is really training and quality. And we've incorporated a lot of that training costs already in the operational sections, and I think that's also work in future rate making in when they do this rate analysis going further in, is to really do more depth of understanding of that. But these are the 4 buckets. Now the next slide we're going to talk about is a little bit more detail about personnel. Oh no, it isn't. The next slide is contextual. So the idea here is that even though within those 4 buckets, we recognize that every organization and every program, even within organization, is unique and different. And so what this model does is it really uses research averages, which would include information that's informed by our own cohort of providers. But averages represent basically a median or a middle ground, and some folks are going to come in above and below. And they may come in above in one area and below in another area. And the idea here is that you expect to see some cohesion across the cohort. No provider is expected, when we produce this cost data to them as averages, they're not expected to then, that's what you have to do. That's how much your rent is, or that's how much your insurance cost should be, or whatever it is, or your personnel costs. The idea here is that the data is used to inform the model, to inform the rate, not to then legislate to all of our LIAs what they have to do and not do in terms of expenses. And the hope is that that rate will cover all of the expenses associated with delivering that service. Certainly if providers find that the costs do not adequately reflect their own costs, then we would do a secondary analysis and bring, but that would, what they're saying here is that if they're seeing a higher or lower than 25% difference, that there would be some recalculation of the rate. We also know for sure that over time costs change. So I think the department has a commitment to reviewing the rate. I'm not sure what the schedule for that is. As like I said, I'm not the rates administrator. I just heard this presentation a million times, and so apparently I am playing one at this meeting. So, sorry. The next slide does go into detail about personnel costs. And basically, this shows you the elements of the personnel costs that we're taking. So like I said at the beginning, we identify what are the criteria or standards that an organization uses to hire a home visitor and a supervisor. So that drives then the research around looking at what that person's job title is and looking at state data through the state occupational code data set. Now, we found that particularly in some of the higher cost areas in the state, that those wages actually aren't reflective of what it costs to have a living wage. And Tim did a fair amount of research, I will say Tim Kelly, our rates administrator, and found a second source of regional wage standards developed by Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So what the department is doing, oh, there's a hand up. Let me, okay.
Adrian had his hand up.
Okay, well, let me just finish my sentence and then I'll ask Adrian, you can answer your own question. No, I'll try to answer your question. So the department is looking at both Massachusetts, the MIT wage standard and the SOC code. And whichever one is higher for that particular region, the department is opting to use, which is resulting in a really interesting wage inflation for folks in King County in particular. Adrian?
No, sorry, that was by mistake. Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, usually, okay, well, if you have a question, you're usually super smart, so. Usually. Well, I'm sorry. I feel hugely brain dead today. So anyway, okay. So the idea here, though, is that so that's and wages are a big driver of program costs. So I'd say this box, this particular blue box of personnel costs is the biggie, and it incorporates those regionalized wages using one of those two data sets, and then applying all these other benefits and taxes that people experience during being employed. It also incorporates as an assumption around a certain level of time. So the professional development box on the bottom there it's how much time it would take to participate in an average person. So in the professional development. So the other training costs associated specifically with administering a home visiting program is incorporated somewhere else, but this is just basic personnel expectations. So I'm gonna breathe a minute, and our next slide is gonna be a detail on the workload. So again, it's not numbers, I'm just showing you the elements in case there's any questions before we go on. And I'm not really seeing any, I need help if there's chat questions or hands up. Okay, because for some reason I'm not seeing that. So the next element is workload, and this is essentially what is the work? How much work is there? And that's driven primarily by the fidelity requirements of each of the models. And there's the rates model framework assumes the models have done their homework on establishing workload when they do things like say, this is the caseload of a home visitor to a family, this is the caseload of a supervisor to the coordinator, that kind of thing. So it takes that into strong consideration. But we also know that the contract requirements that we expect of our programs add workload. So that's been added in during the winter. We surveyed our NFP, PET, and Parent-Child Plus programs of detail around contract expectations, and that information was included in the workload calculations. And in this example of this particular program model, you can see in red, it says the home visitor is expected to have a caseload of 14. So that's part of that workload expectation. And for this model, there's 5 home visitors to every supervisor. So a supervisor would supervise 5 home visitors. Now, if a program employs 3 home visitors, then it would be, a proportionate amount in terms of how the rate would calculate that work. So that's just it's just how the rate figures out how to cost out that person. And I will say that what I've learned over the course of rates work is that the rate formulation is really crafted around an FTE service delivery person. In our case, it would be around a home visitor. So all of the numbers and ratios, even though the home visitor here in this model would serve 14 families, all the numbers associated with the rates, how to fully load that home visitor essentially so that they can do the work. So basically, one home visitor in this model would be loaded with a 20% FTE supervisor. So that's how that ratio works. And again, if you don't understand, I can try to explain it. But and then the rest of the numbers are DCYF established numbers and also based on our contract language. So for example, a program manager would supervise a program that might encompass 20 home visitors. So again, it would be 1/20th of a program manager's salary would be loaded into the home visitor as part of this rate model. And then we also loaded in time to do kind of what they're calling it PBC/CQI. It's that additional work that's required to do mostly the CQI work, and that's based on surveying, as well as understanding that there needs to be kind of upper management. In this case, we're calling it an executive director, but it could be, these titles are not, they might not transfer to organizations, but it's really that higher level management knowing that that's important. And I don't remember the ratio for that, but then also that there's some administrative and or data entry support offered to the program, and some of that time is baked in as well to that home visitor. We can go to the next slide, and I wanted to, here is the different slide we don't usually include in the model. What we would have is just one, whoever that model is. So as a result of doing the rates work, DCYF has established model our caseload standards by model for those folks who are in or going into rates. So you can see here our Parent-Child Plus program, based on this work that we've done, adding in the contract expectations, et cetera, an early learning specialist in Parent-Child Plus would be expected to have a caseload of 13 families. A community outreach doula would have a caseload of 13 families. A family spirit health educator would have a caseload of 14, and this is all if they're 1.0. So if they're half or whatever, it's all prorated. A therapist through child psychotherapy, a 1.0 would have 15 families. A parent educator and parents teachers would have 18, and then a nurse home visitor would have 25. And I have stars or asterisks next to those because we have some cultural adaptations for programs serving tribes. So our tribal parents as teachers programs hold 12 families, and we have one particular program that's where they have an FTE dedicated to serving. This is for the PAT program. They have an FTE dedicated to serving the Yakama Nation, and their caseload is 15. And then in the nurse home visitors, the 2 nurse home visitors at Yakama Valley Memorial Hospital serving the Yakama Nation have a caseload of 16 each. So when we bake in the caseload, we're baking in those caseloads. And so it's going to be slightly different for those asterisk ones. But this is one model variation that we're doing. The result of doing this has then resulted in a net loss of slots when we've gone through and assigned slots to programs of 93. So because we had some programs who were carrying caseloads much higher than that. We have a few programs that are having caseloads lower than that. So we go to the next slide, so now we're going back into the rates presentation. This slide talks a little bit about both the operations training side of things, and we customized this, although most of the blue boxes there you would see are research based from the work that DCYF has done, in which rates work across all of its service lines. They've established certain existing costs, and I actually think this is one of the strengths of the rates work, because a significant number of our LAs some have really strong indirect rates and have federally negotiated rates with the feds, but a lot don't. A lot don't even put indirect costs in their budgets. And even when they do, they'll put 10% in. And when all is said and done, this is according to Tim, when they look at it, it ends up becoming and it's not an indirect rate at this point, because it's also costs that we see people direct line item, rent, utilities, cell phone costs, things like that. But this ends up being higher than 20%. It's between 20 and 30%, depending upon the numbers. But we also build into here, if the model has specific per family costs associated with materials. So that's able to, again, because that's a scalable cost, we're able to put that in here as operating. So that's what that red is. With a couple of our models, we have more lines than this. So this particular program just has this one line. This is where, Marilyn, you'd see the toolkit that nurses need to have to go out into the field. It's where our doulas have a pretty extensive toolkit as well. They don't call it a toolkit, but things that you need to go out in order to serve families. And then the next 2 slides are going to talk about what the rate kind of payment entails. So we can go to the next slide, which is really a case rate, a service. If you go to the next slide, service rate. So in this, that you can see the difference in the amount right there. But if you bring all those costs together, and there are some costs that are not in there yet. And so I want you to, first of all, be aware of that. And the next slide will start to identify that. But when we're able to take the costs that are scalable, that you can do by family or by service worker, by home visitor, that's what the rate model has done. It's brought in all of those costs. You can see those 4 boxes to the right. So in this particular model, the way we've currently budgeted that program on the bottom box, when we take out those costs that I just said that are not scalable, which we'll talk, that's the next slide. This particular program model of the programs that we fund, the average cost per family, when we look at their total budget divided by the number of slots, they get about $8,000 per family. But through the case model rate, it'll be $11,241. And this is actually the King County rate, so it's a little bit higher. When we go outside of King County, the rate falls a little bit. So depending on where you go. But this particular model, we were focusing on King County. So that shows you the difference in scale. And then, yeah, thanks for, because the next slide is there are things that we could not bake into the rate. These are costs that don't necessarily, and in some cases this is not true, but for the models that we're working on moving into rates, this fees for models, these fees are regardless of how many families you serve. And so, for example, our Family Spirit programs all have to pay $10,000 a year to be a Family Spirit affiliate, regardless if they serve 10 families, 2 families, or 29 families. They also have to participate in training, and that's when they experience, and so this is model training, and there's also, some models have certification fees. So these again are, they're not based on the number of families served. There's certainly travel associated with home visits, but that's gonna vary based on the program, right? And some programs serve huge regions and some programs serve small regions. So travel costs associated with visits, associated with going and attending model training, and associated with attending our HVSA meetings, which also vary considerably from where that meeting is happening, are direct billable. So what that means is there may be a cost associated with obtaining screening tools or data system fees, because several of our models either pay into a data system and it's not part of their model fee, or they have to pay for consultants to do data work.
There's a question for Allison.
Allison.
Good morning, Renee. I just had a question regarding this direct billables.
Yeah.
So when I fill out my PCQ, does it have to equal the exact amount that we are able to get? Because we have so many different categories that we need to spend on that aren't listed on there. So I'm a little confused on if that number matching or not.
Yeah, we should talk, because what we don't want, because a lot of stuff's been baked into the rate already. So we, I would say you definitely want to try to match the direct billables budget, because that's going to get translated onto your contract as your direct billables budget. Direct billables budget. I know I said budget twice. So if you have other costs, let's go through that. I know Allison's actually, she's a rates program, so she's actually starting to work on this. So, and this aspect of the contract is budget based, which is the way we currently do things, but the rest of the budget is rate based. And so what we have to do is go through with you, Allison, and say, oh yeah, we should add that in, or oh no, that's part of the rate, and we'll talk, and so figure that out with you.
Okay, so it is supposed to match is my very first question.
And my advice is don't go under, but
got it. Okay, thank you.
And then Trissa also.
Trissa.
Yeah, I'm just curious how that would look like. So what I mean is, so you have the rate and that would get put into whatever the budget is for the contract, model fees, model trainings. That's pretty standard. You know what I'm saying? That's easy, but I'm curious about mileage, like how you would, does that get directly billed to DCYF, or do you just like, oh, we think on average you'll spend this much on mileage, so we'll stick it? I'm just curious how that works.
How do you currently do it when you do your PCQ and budget? How do you currently project for mileage? I would do that's what I would do.
We project on the last 12 months.
Then that's what you would do. Although you don't have to do that in the rates program yet. But so
I was mostly just curious in general how it was gonna work. So
yeah, how it's gonna work is you're gonna receive, and this is kind of later on, you're gonna receive a pre-contract questionnaire that still has some of the same staffing plan and slots and where your slots are kind of, and it tells you what your maximum contract rate is gonna be to draw down on those cases essentially for the year. And then you're also gonna see what your direct billables budget is. And then when you go to the budget worksheet now, it doesn't have anything in your budget worksheet except these items. Because all the other items that were on the budget worksheet before, so if you're curious, well, where's my blah, blah, blah? Well, it's part of the rate. So that's why you're not seeing it. So we only want you to calculate your budget based on these items.
gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Slide, I don't know if this will help or not. It's really hard because this is a little bit like I'm not using real numbers, and so it's using a different part of your brain. this might help. The current way we do things, right, is we ask you to prepare a detailed budget within your annual allocation. You provide us with that, then we divided that up into categories that give you pay points, and you bill us based on the expenses that you incur every month. That's a cost reimbursement contract. Go to the next slide. That's the way we do it now. The way we're moving is a hybrid case rate plus direct billables. So the direct billables on here is still a cost reimbursement. Direct billables is still that way. We're still using a budget, having pay points, and you're billing us for the pay points, and you have a max. So and it's gonna be same thing if you have multiple fund sources, it'll be by that. The second section though, or the first section really, the rate methodology is what we're calling a hybrid case rate. So if you're trying to understand, this is where we're starting to even veer off into deeper territory. That $11,000 that you saw as the case rate a couple slides ago is based on a per unit or per family cost. We're dividing that 65-35. So 35 of that is basically, here's what you're gonna get for a funded slot. 35% of that $11,000, whether or not the slot is filled. Because we recognize that there's a cost associated with having that slot available in your organization. It's probably more than 35, but this is what, this is the guidance we've gotten from the feds on FFPSA. We're trying to align with FFPSA. So ultimately, that $11,000, 35% of it is steady state, 65% of it is based on a service indicator having occurred during the month. All right?
So can I use a more simplified term? So basically you get 65%, you'll get the whole 100% if the slot's filled, but you get 35% if it's not. Is that an easy way to say it? Okay.
Unfilled and served.
Served.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to be served. Yeah. Okay, let's go. I guess I've been taking too long. I know this is hard, but okay, the next slide. The other, that slide is, but we're giving a 3-month transition time from July to September, 100% capacity plus direct billables. And then after that, it'll be 35-65. And we can share these slides too with you guys. But the idea there is, and this will be the cadence as programs come into rates too, they'll have a 3-month transition time. So it's 100% capacity, 100% until 3 months in, then it's based on the delivery. So let's go to the, like I said, I'm spending too long. Okay. So, and you kind of heard that a little bit. What we're doing now is issuing a new pre-contract questionnaire, a new budget. We're customizing the statement of work based on the program model still has some of the same requirements, but we're also giving people a budget for those 4 categories there. And trying to develop contract language to align with what I just said. Just not easy. We're also developing, updating to our reporting process to align with rates billing, and Cassie was kind of alluding to that already. So we go to the next slide, I believe. Yes. So, so how we're defining right now, and this is not approved yet by the leadership from the agency, but how we've proposed to define active service engagement is that a family has received a visit and or an encounter during that month period of time. And this is a big change for our programs. I keep looking right at Samantha. She keeps looking right at me to decide that. It's within a month now, and so it used to be you would count back 90 days. Now you can it's during, like, so if you're billing for April, it's who got a visit or who got an encounter in April. And what we're proposing is not how many visits or how many encounters, it's how many families. So the unit is family, not home visit. Families who received a visit. Families who received a visit or who received an encounter. If they received an encounter and a visit, it's still 1. If they received 3 visits, it's still 1. If they received 0 visits, 0 encounters, it's 0 for the month, right? And an encounter, and the only thing to change about encounter is it's a substantive 2-way interaction with participating family via in-person email, text, or phone call that includes minimal or no model content. The interaction would not be considered a visit by the model. But it is not a check-in on the date. Oh, we want to just make sure we have our date. You know, it's not an administrative interaction. Does that make sense?
Does this have to be by the month? Like, is that
Yes.
something?
If you want to bill for the month, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat that if we'll get the slides, which I clarified, we'll send them out with a follow-up email. And also from Shelly Willis, who is the person I should reach out to about fatherhood? We are exploring launching a fatherhood home visitation model.
Well, right now, she reach out to you? Yeah. She should reach out to Emily. Yeah, this is a big change, and this is a consequence of moving to a rates payment methodology, is there has to be some service indication in the month. And this is not a done deal. I mean, this is,
Well, that's what I'm asking.
it's not a done deal in the not great direction though.
Even like in early Head Start, which is way stricter typically, you have a 30-day hold to count that family to get somebody else enrolled in that slot. So, I mean, ethically, a month is a really quick turnaround for somebody to had a visit on March 30th.
And then you have to, and they drop.
And you're gonna give time to make contacts and try to reach them. We're gonna, you know, our policy says we're gonna send a letter, we're gonna give a week for them to respond.
Yeah.
So the likelihood of us refilling that slot within that next month is gonna be really difficult.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel very ethical.
Right.
The good additional information.
Yeah, it is.
I hear what Samantha's saying, although I would say in allowing the encounter to count as service, I think that is going to help quite a bit, because I agree, you know, we have a staff or a home visitor who's saying, okay, I'm exiting this family. Okay, I've now assigned that family. Well, it might take 4 to 6 weeks to have that first official model visit, but they've been working with them, texting them, calling them, having a pre-visit, filling out paperwork, but our model just doesn't call it an official enrollment until that first model visit. So I do think allowing the encounters are going to counterbalance that issue of refilling slots more quickly.
We also have 3 hands raised.
Yeah. That's the hope, Trista, is that, and we're hoping that we'll be able to count encounters. That's our hope right now. We're not 100% sure that we're gonna be able to do it. We're pushing on it.
And then Dila had her hand raised.
Hi, Dila.
Hi, actually, I think Adrian had his hand up as well before I did. Adrian, do you want to go? Okay. Hi, everyone. So as we are one of the only programs that is currently going through this process right now with the intention of contracts in July. So I'm speaking from our current experience with this. I want to respond to what Trista said. When this was presented to us in terms of what it meant for our program, it was the current thinking at the moment was that an encounter that was pre-enrollment would not be counted in active engagement. So I think that's a really important point that to get clarity on, because that I'm hearing a different thing today than I heard in the meeting to discuss the actual definition of active engagement when they were presenting our potential rate. And I have some serious concerns about that. I think someone in the room brought it up. I'm sorry I couldn't see. I heard the voice and recognized the voice, but I didn't see the face. You know, for us, and because we work with multilingual communities that have a very high level of distrust with home visiting, we have to do a lot of courting and relationship building before we get to an enrollment and sign consent forms. And we do that in part so that when someone consents to a 2-year program, they stay in the program. And that's one reason we have high retention. What will happen with the model, the definition as it was proposed to us this week, would be that we would not get any credit for all of that work with that family prior to them signing that enrollment agreement. And what I'm concerned about is that will create a situation where home visitors have a lot of undue pressure on them to get someone enrolled. And that could lead to low retention where families 2 weeks later, 2 months later, 3 months later say, oh, wait a second, I guess this isn't for me after all. I didn't really understand what I was signing or what was involved in the home visiting process. And that will lower retention. And also it opens up the possibility of coercion, right? Which coercion simply can also just mean someone who was underinformed about the services that they're going to receive. It doesn't mean that they are being, actively harmed, but it means that they weren't informed and they did not provide informed consent. And so I don't think the current definition, excluding pre-enrolled families, is workable. So I think, Trissa, what you were asking is not what I heard earlier this week. So it would be great if you wanted to clarify that more. I know it's a moving target within the HVSA right now, but I think this is exactly the kind of thing that the diversity of programs in this room should really talk about and share their input with, because I think those of us who are doing the work know that there's a huge dance that happens before someone is enrolled. And this is not covering that, as I understand it. Renee, you always let me know if I'm not saying something correctly, so tell me if I'm missing something. I trust you.
You're 100% right. And the way it's been communicated is once a family is enrolled, the service numbers start to count. So yeah, I appreciate the specific input a lot. So I think it's a good Delia, you're very articulate in the impacts.
And I think what you're bringing up is also the tensions that we're navigating internally, and being able to explain all of the different complexities that everybody's bringing up, and a very kind of structured funding system that's supposed to support multiple service delivery programs within DCYF. And so a lot of the things that you're bringing up and are talking about are things that we're internally looking at and advocating for, and really trying to educate our other fiscal partners internally. So and that's part of the reason things are consistently moving, is here's a semi-decision and we push back and say this doesn't align with where things are going, or here are the things that fall outside of what looks like the decision is going to be. How can we structure that? How can we put that in? How can we make some adjustments? So we are still moving in the direction of factoring in a lot of what you're bringing up, and trying to figure out how we can get this rate structure to probably expand and push a little in areas that it may not be doing in other parts of DCYF.
I appreciate that, Nellie. I think it's because we meet so rarely as a group, I think it's really important for this group to know, even though the vast majority of the programs represented in this group are not going through rate setting yet, this is coming. As someone who is, frankly, feels like the guinea pig going through this right now, we are contending with this, but this will be something that everyone else will have to contend and work through. And we're being asked to sign a contract by July 1st that encodes some of this thinking. And so this may seem like it's an abstraction, but what happens now will impact every program in the HVSA later. So it's really important that people express if you have some issues with this now, even if you're not impacted until a year from now.
100%.
And I can jump in. Sorry, I had to hop in and out actually for urgent rates call here, even though I came in a little bit late. This is Laura at DCOS. Renee and Nellie. Hey, sorry, I wasn't there since 10. I do want to share really specifically, Dila, that it is assumed that as part of voluntary home visiting programs that outreach and community work is required and kind of built into the model. And the challenge is neither the models nor our contract specified a quantity, like how much time is that, or is there a staff role specific to that? And so in the rate modeling, without that specific kind of quantity of time or percentage of effort, either that we dictate to you or the models dictate to you about how much time it takes to do that, it was really difficult for us to make the case as to We need to have an outreach worker as part of, I'm calling it outreach worker, but basically supporting the enrollment process. And I can tell you, we had multiple conversations about this internally over the last many months. So that's one of the nuances of moving into this rate model, is that it basically assumes that everything within the model is already captured within the model structure, or what we're asking for you specifically and quantifiably. And that's one of the limitations right now, is we don't have that specified. We do say outreach, we do say enrollment, we do say those things in the contract, but it's not really quantifiable in a real clean way. So that's part of the limitation. And I think what I'm hoping, and what has been committed to us in home visiting, is that this is round one of rate setting, and that we may miss some things, we may not get all the quality stuff, and that we know that after we get through all the models, of course, there's a commitment to do a round two and reassess, what did we miss, what's the impact, and that kind of thing. But it's hard a little bit right now to, we're kind of pinning those all things to this round two. So thanks for that feedback. And like Nellie said, they are definitely part of the conversations we've had, and how this model fits into the rate is, by this model, I mean voluntary home visiting, fits into the overall DCOF rate structure. We're learning through that as we go, and where we need to expand. So thank you for that. Adrian, you might be next in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So some of the points that I was going to make, Dila say it. Looking at this, I get a little bit concerned, because, we talked about following the model fidelity, but we're not doing it for the caseload or for the way that we're looking at active enrollments. So when do we decide the model fidelity is not convenient or not? That's one of the questions. And then the other piece because once I hear Dila, it came to my mind, what is our role as an HBAC? It seems like I feel that every time that I'm in the meeting, I feel that it's just informing us what you are doing. I know working with us on strategizing, how do we support the process? Like, for example, Laura, you just mentioned you have been talking with leadership. And my other question is, who is leadership? Because every time I hear leadership, but I don't know who leadership is. And you have been talking to them for 11 months. But how do we support the process? How do you work with us to to support you in what you're saying to the rest of the leadership? Because I feel that, our role, I don't know at this point, what is our role? Because you're not consulting with us. Does it work? And I know that you're trying to balance it out between all the rest of the state, but it feels like an afterthought coming to us because you already decided. So just wanted to put that there.
Thanks, Adrian.
We have Marilyn.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Thank you. So I just really want to support what Delia said. And I want you to know, Delia, that I am not in your shoes, but I know that you are the guinea pig for us. So I want you to know that. And I am very concerned about what I'm hearing today. A couple of things came to my mind. And when we're talking about a voluntary program, and then there's this pressure to enroll because we're not going to get paid for it, I would say it's with all of our work with Nurse Family Partnership, but especially with our work with Tatawaks and the Yakama Nation. There is definitely, in order for this to be culturally respectful and a voluntary program, there is definitely, courting is a very good word, but there is time where the nurse is building the trust with the family before they enroll, and it continues to build afterwards, but that is not how we practice. And I guess to follow up on what Adrian said, like, LIAs know this. Like, if you talk with us, we know this. And I could quantify with the nurses about how long that takes. So I'm concerned about that. And then the other thing about, being respectful to culture and to economics and to rural communities. Our goal is to see them twice a month. And we'll only get credit if we see them once a month. So like right now, we're in one of the periods of time where many of our clients are either out picking cherries or they're working in the warehouses, and they're working really long hours. And they need a pause sometimes. And do we check in with them? Yes. Do we say, I'm thinking about you. I know you're working really hard. Do you have any questions for me? We might not have a visit, but they know we're still there with them. And so we're not going to get credit for that. Some of our clients go to Mexico for a month, and some of our nurses have even arranged phone calls to Mexico so that we can get a visit in. And while I admire that, I don't know if that's what we're supposed to be doing. And then with our Yakima Nation clients, where they're down at the river fishing for salmon, or they've recently been digging roots, or they're picking huckleberries. In order for this to work and for us to see them for 2.5 years, that mutual respect has to be there. And so pressuring a client to see us, these are basic things, but it just worries me that it's going to change how we practice, and not, I don't know if in a good way. So I'm concerned about that.
Thanks, Marilyn.
We also,
I unmuted my computer and forgot to switch it off. We had a couple comments in the chat that I'll read from Alicia Anderson. Will this have the unintended consequence of agencies unenrolling folks quicker instead of working to re-engage in order to save budget? How might this impact families, in particular families with substance use disorder, as a factor that require consistent re-engagement? No need to discuss here, just a factor to ensure it is being considered. And then we had a comment from Trissa. I wonder if this is an issue with DCYF because so many of the programs it funds are not voluntary. CPS, juvenile rehabilitation, but programs on the prevention side, home visiting, savings. Yeah, that count is right? Okay. Yeah. Are voluntary, so the system doesn't know how to capture the fact that we don't have a built-in caseload. We have to work for engagement and enrollment. And then she received 2 hearts on that comment. And then Dila, I see this adversely affecting retention and the diversity of families engaged and enrolled.
Yes, all of those comments. Yeah, I just wanted to say we hear you. We hear you. I wrote everything down. I think we've been trying to carry that message. The more you talk, the stronger the voice is all I can say.
And I realized that, first of all, I just want to say that I realize that you have been doing like heroic amounts of work to get this rate process through for the HVSA, and it's not an easy task, and it's not entirely a process that you've designed. You're being asked to do things in a certain way, so you do have a lot of empathy. What you're also hearing are people who are trying really hard to advocate for what they know works and works well for our families, and so that's where this is coming from. I would really encourage going back to those racial equity principles, those equity principles that you had on your earlier slide. I think many of us would be very happy to articulate under each of those points how this could impact those equity goals, because you could even look at some of the chat comments to see that there's a conflict there between some equity principles and this.
Laura, go ahead, Laura.
Just wanted to note on Adrian, because I heard you. I think there's three questions in your or 3 statements in your comments. One was about contract and model fidelity. The second was about who's DCR leadership, And the third is, what is the role of HVAC at this? And that is, I would not say that's for DCOF to dictate. The statute, I just copied it into the chat, says what the role of HVAC is. And as leaders in this room, I guess I would encourage you to reflect on what that role says. And is there, something as HVAC that you want to, say or do about that, that, is for the collective here to determine. We, like Dila just said, are utilizing a DCOF design process to move this work into the rates. It is an opportunity for external entities to inform us at this point where we're at. It's a little bit challenging, we know, because a lot of this is just coming out and none of it's yet an implementation. But like I said, would encourage you all as HVAC to think about, what is it that HVAC does or says about this. We're hearing it right now in this meeting. It'll be in the notes, it'll be in the recording. And if there's something else that HVAC wants to consider, that is for you all to decide.
A few observations that I was hoping to make. So I've seen this rate process other aspects of the agency, and it has resulted in significant increases. That said, Triss's point about the voluntary nature is sticking with me here. And I wonder if, so going back to the rates that I've seen forecasted for the models that they've previewed so far, the increases are substantial. So I don't think I haven't heard concerns, at least for the ones that are out there. It's more about how you would be able to pull down those rates. So it's the rate itself is substantial. I haven't heard necessarily an inherent concern about the rate. It sounds like, at least to me, the concern is about the monthly count of the visit, right? So take this for what it's worth. And to Adrian's point too, about the HVAC piece, I think that every individual here has, and every program, I think it's very valuable. This is a program that hasn't had rates before, especially Dila and those others that are going forward soon. Collectively or individually, if we wanted to, as Laura noted, the leadership that are involved in making the decisions to indicate the concerns and the why. I don't administer these programs or work with these programs, obviously. The compelling points about the courtship, the respect, going back to the respect of culture and not wanting an unintended consequence of a false relationship. And conveying that, and I would reinforce that we're excited about having a rate, appreciate the process, all those pieces, and is this an area that can be revisited?
And it made me think of like ECAP. ECAP even just extended their 30-day hold to a 45-day hold. So could we look at something like that where you're still getting to count that slot and have a certain amount of time to fill it? Because you could be doing the pre-enrollment stuff, building that relationship with somebody during that time.
Yeah, rolling average.
Or it could be helping you as somebody who is not active that you're trying to re-engage for an amount of time. So that, or like going back to the quarterly, counting them as active. Something like that, some type of hold.
Just reinforcing a couple pieces that you fear would have an unintended consequences contrary to the agency's values and the program, all of the program values.
I see Gretchen's hand is up, and then after Gretchen, we'll take a little bit of a break and then come back and regroup. So, because it is 11:15. So Gretchen, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I just wanted to call out that we do have some concerns about the rates, at least the preliminary amount we've seen, and we're about the
Your question?
I'm still so much slower. Can you hear me okay?
No, you're breaking up pretty bad.
Okay. How about now?
Now, good. You sound great now.
Okay. So just some concerns about how there's different rates for different regions. You know, when I look at the rural communities and, you know, partly we are.
We lost her. Oh. Maybe when she comes back, she can put it into Gretchen, I wonder if it might be easier for you to put it into the chat. I don't know if that is an option for you. And I don't know if you can even hear us now. She does not. There we go. Do you want to try? There we go.
Yeah, I can try putting it into the chat.
That might be, and then if it's something that needs a response, we'll work on definitely getting that response to you. So it is, we're gonna just take a break. We've been all kind of sitting in a space or however it is for about an hour. So it is 11:17. We're gonna make it a little bit shorter. Let's just make it 5 minutes. I was gonna say 4, what is 1 minute? So let's what are we gonna do in a whole minute? So let's just make it 5 minutes. So we'll see you back in 5 minutes. 11:22. Just so they don't have to. I'll just move myself.
Any vibrating live? Or with multiple kids, that's just not even a thing. I know, that's really. You know, this Martha. Really? Well, that's what I heard. I registered for half Ironman.
Wow.
That's amazing. I am so terrified.
You're gonna be great.
For
you,
things.
It's a long time coming. I feel like you've been like getting yourself more and more prepared for this.
Yeah. So I thought this year I was just gonna go up to the Olympic distance.
Yeah.
And I registered for that in September. I'm like, okay. And I joined this triathlon club because I needed help swimming. I'm like, if I'm gonna swim a mile in the Olympic, like I think this is actually gonna.
Yeah.
The headline is 8 hours. So
which is a great distance.
Probably once in a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think what's swimming terrified.
What is it at the half Ironman?
A 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, and a half marathon, 13.1 mile run.
Jeez.
The cutoff is 8.5 hours. So my goal is 8 hours and 29 minutes.
I love it. Yeah, exactly.
Alive. That's awesome.
Totally.
Still standing. That's
Oh, that's amazing. When is it? Where is it?
It was September 22nd in Tri-Cities. It's the first time it's in Tri-Cities.
I
moved
wonder
it
what
from
the
Maple
temperature
Valley.
is gonna be for you.
Well, Tri-Cities is typically warm, so I just bought a wetsuit.
Yeah.
Because I never used a wetsuit before.
Yeah.
Apparently the Columbia River's kind of cold.
Oh my gosh.
But it's a downriver swim, so that's what sold me. If I'm gonna do one, that's gotta be the one.
Wow.
And it's a rolling hill bike and a flat run.
That's awesome.
Where Coeur d'Alene is like super hilly, the lake is choppy, it's cold, and it's in June, which doesn't give you much time, like to train out.
I'm so excited for you.
I'm scared.
It is scary, but it's incredible. I feel like did we ever talk about this? That there's this radio lab that's called Limits. You should listen to it because it's gonna like pump you up.
Is that a podcast?
It's a podcast, so I'll send it to you. It's basically this great study around there's 3 stories around how people really push their limits. And it also brings in some of the research from like you've got this piece in your brain that's called like they describe it as like the governor of your energy. And it's really conservative. So you actually have like so much more ability than what you tell what your brain actually releases for its energy. And then there's this another part of there's like great science that's involved, great like stories, crazy things that people have done. But then one of my favorites is it tells a story about this woman who does a triathlon, never really did a lot of the prep. And there's this amazing friend, she ended up doing really, really well. Like she was like in 2nd place. It was her
college thesis as an exercise science graduate. And so now we always say this to each other, friends, that I used to do like a lot of running, like the very, very end, when she's almost going across the finish line, she completely collapses, loses the ability to hold in her bodily functions. And it's all on camera. And you see her like, you can Google it too and see this, you see her dramatically crawl to the finish because she's like,
So we're gonna hear in your recording.
And they do this interview with her and her best friend saying like, what was going through your brain?
Too personal, then.
And
No.
she describes it, her inner voice just said, get up, get up. And so now whenever I go on like a long run or bike with some of my friends, I just look at them and be like, get up, get up. But
Well, I think that's the
great
thing
for
is
them.
you don't have to be doing like all those distances all the time.
No.
Because in the moment.
All right, we're coming back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always, whenever I would do a marathon, I would never remember
But Liv's lovely
and rest of them, I
story.
would call garbage miles, garbage miles. Like, cause you get your.
All right, it is
Better,
11:22, so we will get back together. And just let us know if you thumbs up, turn on your camera, for those of you who are virtual. So the next part of our agenda and the flow that we're going through is to talk about expansion, which I think that matches really well with the conversation that we've been having.
I'll make it.
I'm excited to see where we're at.
Oh, yeah. What's mine is yours?
Alright.
Oh, I thought there was a whole section before it. So first of all, great feedback on the rates. I appreciate just the deep thinking and also the dedication that we all have, right, to serving families and the nuanced work that it takes. So based on where we are landing with the race work and the loss of slots, and we've been actually working with the community in Southwest Washington to explore home visiting. Where we're kind of ending up with expansion, if you want to go to the next slide, just a reminder that we have about $1 million that are supposed to be starting to execute out on July 1st. We have not begun that process because we've been kind of working on rates. We're in the process right now, actually interviewing somebody to help me do this work. So we'll see on a time limited basis. But so again, it's state general funds to fund the 9 models that we currently have listed and administering it through a rates-based process. So it's a little bit awkward. But if you go to the next slide, because we're still in the middle of figuring out rates, that's why it's up. So what we're proposing, really based on the fact that, well, yeah, that's a hidden slide, but that's okay because that's who we are right now. This is the recommendation. And really, you know, we came to you last couple of HVAC meetings asking for guidance on, you know, priority populations or priority geographic areas or stages, implement stages. And really the feedback that we shared with you last week was there's kind of, you know, there's not real consensus. Everybody likes every option. And, or not everybody likes every option, but a sizable portion of you each like all the options that we presented. And we really gave this some thought because we're losing 93 slots that we know of right now with the movement towards. Yeah.
Do you want to finish?
Yes. Okay. I'll just finish because so the idea here is that we would the recommendation we're making is that we set aside a certain portion of the funds for startups, since there's been some work done with one community already in Southwest Washington, and that the remainder of the dollars left, you know, however much that is, we would work to regain those slots within the HVSA. So we would offer to programs that are actually highly enrolled right now an opportunity to invite for application. And we'd be looking at, you know, criteria of having at least 75% active enrollment of their funded slots within 2 of the last 4 quarters. That's our proposal. Actually, it's 22 have 85% or higher, it's a typo, but so out of our 48. Alrighty, thank you.
So my question is, why is there a loss of slots? So
because we have a certain amount of money and it doesn't pay for that, it's not pay. And so what we did when we figured out the caseload, right, for our programs, and we did that adjustment to lower the caseload. And we looked at caseload was how are programs currently staffed? So how much caseload would they then with their current staff? What would that result in? And we're layering that, Erica, against how much available dollars we have to distribute the rates. And the result is a loss of slots. So to pay the full rate to programs, we can't pay for the same number of slots.
And that's using all of that.
The underspend, that's not my issue. It's really about the dollars that we have available on an ongoing basis to support programming. So Laura would have to answer the underspend. We don't underspend.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it very well, but the underspend is factored into this, Erica. And I can talk about that in a little bit when I do the HVSA account balance update. But like Renee said, for all models, what we're doing is holding the FTE that we're funding stable. So when we had previously funded 15 slots per person, per caseload or per staff, say it's going down to 13. So we're not funding new staff to be added to build up that original caseload. We're ensuring that we can continue to support the existing staff within the organization that we're funding.
So then, was my understanding that you'd be submitting a decision package for the Delta with the rates? Is that still the plan? So wouldn't that?
There will be a decision package put together, Erica. That is true. I don't know that it'll be based on slots or be based on funding, ensuring that we can fund all of the stability of programs. We're not there yet within the agency, but there will be a decision package to seek more funding to ensure that we're able to implement the rates.
So I guess I go back to, I didn't envision that there would be any loss of slots, because you would pay those slots at the higher rate, drawing from the underspend, going to get a DP for the Delta so that those costs could be maintained on an ongoing basis, recognizing that is risk because that's not guaranteed. I know that. So this posit that there's loss of slots by doing rates is news.
Mm-hmm. The department, we're projecting that the increase of cost for implementing rates is going to far exceed the available funding even this year, including the underspend, Erica, because the increase of cost is going to be, it's variable by model based on what they were kind of average, and you know, it's not really comparable, but at least 30% increase. The department did not get 30% new funds to do this. There's like $2 million really, or maybe think about like 2 million federal and about 2 million state that are available. That's not sufficient. So as part of this process and standardizing caseload, the department moved forward with assuming that if we maintain capacity of FTE, there will be a slight reduction. I think it's 93 slots out of 3,000 so far. But that's one of the approaches that we've had to take to implement this approach of rates in home visiting.
Laura, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but in 23 we secured $8 million for rates.
That was not really a true number, Erica, because the state dollars that were actually supported this fiscal year were $670,000, and next year $1.5 million. So that's a total of about 2.2. And federally is where they put all of the rate increase, Erica, and that's not actually available money. They gave us increased authority, but we don't actually have that level of increase of MCV funding for increasing rates.
And more than half of our slots are not.
So the way the legislature did it was mostly put it on federal, but there's not actually that money to do it. It was assumed that McPhee could support that much expansion, but the award that we got for 23 that we're about to spend on July 1 increased, and then the 24 decreased by about $800,000. So there's not the available funding to do it.
What about the money that started January 1 of this year?
That's $673,000. That will carry into next year and is being applied in all of our calculations for rates.
We also have a question.
And Erica, we can go into this more offline if it's helpful. We have I have it in spreadsheets and things like that. I'm not sure if it's useful to go into this, but like I said, the assumptions that were made of where the money could be put, the funding is not fully available. And I'll talk a little bit about it in the account balance, but I want to make sure we can go back to the expansion conversation that Renee is leading us through right now. And Erica, I can make sure you have whatever information you're looking for.
We had a question in the chat. Renee, I think you answered this one. How many total slots are being lost through Reed Center?
93.
And then Gretchen sent her message in the chat, concerned about equitable pay for home visitors serving rural communities. We've had a vacancy for a year to serve Spanish-speaking families due to pay. The reimbursement doesn't appear to be an increase in our region. And then Trissa has her hand raised.
I just wanted to share a quick perspective of an LIA that's having a reduction in families. We're okay with it. We've been begging for a long time to cap caseloads, and every year our money stayed the same, and we had to figure out how to find the staff to cover the amount. We're losing 24 slots, which is 10% of our families. But it's really the cap of caseloads, which I greatly appreciate. So my staff will now be capped at 18 per home visitor, and that feels very reasonable, and I think they are all very excited about that. So I know that overall people who are way higher up in the legislature or at DCYF probably don't love the fact that there's a reduction in slots, but as an LIA who's having that experience, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it.
Thanks for that perspective, Trissa.
I just want to say as an organization that at the moment is going to have to sign something about the number of slots that it's not hypothetical for. It's not so much about whether or not our slots are reduced, it's that it should be a conversation. So it should not be either has many slots as you're going to have after having won all of the slots that we do have through some really hard-won competitive grant application expansion proposals. So I don't exactly feel the same way. I would like to be able to determine our capacity and how many slots we can fill. And I would like more flexibility to do so. And I think that that's a fair question for everyone to be able to ask. So for programs that want to reduce their slots, fine. But for some other programs who don't want to necessarily reduce their slots or according to model fidelity have different ideas, then it should be a conversation. So I just want to be really clear that one of the first groups to go through this, I know people are learning as they go. It's really important for this to be a conversation and not this is what we calculated the number of slots for you to get to be. It's just going to delay the process because it's a negotiation and we aren't going to go forward with something that isn't in our best interest. So.
Thank you also for that perspective and for sharing what your reality is.
Lucy had a question, I think, in that.
Yeah, I'm in a response to the 93 being lost. Alicia wants to know, it looks like expansion is going to cover about 70 regained slots. Is this an accurate assumption?
I think it really depends on kind of the array of programs that apply, because the rates are, we haven't figured out our rate yet for PAT or NFP, but there's a, range in rate, and so that's gonna then buy essentially a certain number of slots.
And then Laura shared in the chat for PAT and NFP in July, we will be relooking at the rates work that paused several months ago.
Martha had a question, and then Erica. So I thought I heard you say the 93 slots will be, that expansion will follow the rates-based methodology. But for those sites who are not doing it for a year, how does that work?
That's a great question, Martha. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, part of the issue is it's really hard to be doing these two things all at once and
Right,
mandate
right.
something before it's finished. So
Okay.
I don't know. I'm my head is still so far in the implementation of rates. I guess if we were thinking about it, I think if we reconvene the rates work for PAT and NFP, we'll get an understanding potentially of where those rates might be going. So that would then inform, the expansion of dollar amounts essentially. Does that make sense? So it's hard to not be able to communicate what the financial arrangement is going to be through a competitive procurement when you don't and run the procurement at the same time.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's been part of the delay with it is not wanting to dig ourselves further into a hole of not knowing what an adequate budget is for a program before we ask them to compete for it. So we're trying to figure it out. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So back to, so it's not regaining, so back to the 93.
Oh, you're right. That's a terrible way of writing whatever. Yeah. It's not really being a regain the lost slots. It's to regain some of the slots.
But you putting it out because the statute. I'm looking at the statute, and it says solely for expansion. So regaining would be counter to the statute. Right?
Yeah.
Yes. So, and then I'm going back. So I found the expansion. So there was 8.56 million for expansion, 2.02 million state funding, 6.54 million federal funding, 80 some odd % of our programs in the state are NFP and PAT, which are MCV eligible. So I guess I'm confused as to why there's so little of this money going into rates. I'm back at that. Why couldn't that money be used for PAT and NFP since they're all MCV eligible? And 2 million.
Erica, do you mean the $6 million that's federal? Are you referring to the $6 million that's federal when you say there's so much money? So the distinction is, Erica, that's federal authority, not actual federal money. So they increased our authority to use federal funds for this, but we don't actually have that much MCV money that we got. We only got $2 million increase. So they gave us a whole bunch of authority for money that doesn't exist.
So you're saying, so we only got 4 million of this 8 million of what was assumed in
Correct.
the budget?
Yes, correct. Yeah, I've communicated that with our finance office since the beginning, and it's been really tricky to get to that level of detail because in the public webinars that were held, they described it just like you did, $8 million for expansion, but the money that's authority. They gave us $8 million of authority, but the actual money is only, the state dollars are actual money, but the federal is the authority to spend the MCV money if it were that high, but it's not that high.
It's also important to remember that MCV dollars are distributed through the MCV needs assessment, and not all of our PAT and NFP programs are in communities that are identified as MCV communities. So we have a fair number that are, and they also receive state dollars, so there'd be ability to move some of that into MCV. But that would then be extra contract expectations for those folks. So it's not, we talk about this and then you say, but you didn't ask us. Well, we're having conversation right now where programs wouldn't be asked, they would just be moved into federal funding. But not all of our programs are in those communities. So what do we do about that?
And we still haven't been approved to use McPhee dollars for rates. So that's the
Yeah,
other
that's
piece
the
that
other
we're
thing.
having to kind of move through and figure out what we need to do to get to that place. So I think there's layers with all of these things.
There's a couple things in the chat.
Sure.
As Alicia said at the last PAT meeting, I think programs who did have a slot reduction should get higher priority in a competitive procurement. Maybe they get more points or something like that. Marilyn said she agrees with Dila that there should be a conversation with the LIA about what's best for your community and your organization. Trissa shared, just as a side note, DCYF did meet with us. We were told about the caseload caps, and then as an organization looked at what that would mean for us, and then we presented that to our contract specialist in Renee. They agreed with our proposed numbers. This is a large part of why our organization is comfortable with the reduction. The numbers were led by us. And Dila responded in her case that they only told us the number after she asked. They shared the rate, but not the number of slots. She literally had to ask. You know, what's harder is for them to decide it because negotiating backward with them is so hard. And Laura also shared the intent of the 1 million in expansion. The slides are a little confusing the way it's framed regarding. I'm gonna let you share that, Laura. I don't know how to speak those numbers.
Yeah, I think Renee already said it. I don't think the intent, Erica, is to regain slots that were cut within the organizations. I think the intent is to open it as an expansion application. But I think what Renee was trying to communicate, and Renee, correct me if I'm wrong, was that there will be a little bit of a rebalancing, but it won't be an expansion really beyond our slots that exist. And Erica, I just dropped in the chat also, and for everyone else, not just you, Erica, what our McVie funding awards are actually, and these are, they're basically annual budgets. So you can see there was an increase in 22, which is almost spent, to 23, and then a decrease again to 24 by substantial $800,000. So again, the authority assumed that there's going to be this big McVie expansion, but there's not actually at this point. Our grant is going up and down again. So it's a pretty interesting challenge that we're doing to try to, you know, weave all of this in and ensure we have stable funding for our programs. Yeah.
So
Alicia, you can go ahead.
Alicia, and then I'll just bring us back to the expansion conversation. Please, Alicia.
I am kind of going back to that expansion. So just to check the way that I'm hearing what Renee was saying is that it's the intent to do an expansion, but invite the LIAs who have over 75% active enrollment. And likely those are also going to be agencies who've lost slots to apply for that expansion or have priority in that expansion. Is that correct?
So first off, what that says there is that right now, it's just a statement of fact, and it's actually a typo, that 22 of our LIAs have either met or exceeded 85% of active enrollment in the last 2 of 4 quarters. Sorry, I shouldn't say. And so we haven't actually created what high performing, you know, means in terms of enrollment, but we wanted to say that if 85% is the contract, thank you, expectation. I'm not sure, Alicia, we haven't crosswalked performance against the folks who are losing slots. That's just, you know, there's just a lot happening all at the same time. So, but yeah, the intent here is to, yeah, that was actually, to be honest, that was my original. It came out of thinking about that after the PAT meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, was that the approach should be to try to look within and say, is there a way we can support programs, you know, basically recapturing slots. And I think the way that we framed it, and I appreciate people being frustrated about is we've really tried to hold harmless our staff and looked at what we could afford. And so basically we've been presenting to programs, this is what you have as staff that we know about, and this is the new caseload expectation. So here's, you know, what we have. And we're trying to balance a larger budget, and we're barely being able to balance it. So, yeah, I forgot what I was just going to say, but that's kind of that rationale. The rationale for this is just to basically go back and say, hey, you know, we know programs, you know, this is an opportunity for them to potentially get a new FTE. It's really focusing on FTE and not on slot at this point. It's what can our FTEs hold? And I think the good news of all of that is we're acknowledging what is a reasonable workload? And I mean, some people are gonna have to see a little bit of an increase in their workload, but a lot of home visitors are gonna see a decrease. We haven't over the, I think BSK last year basically reorganized itself and funded larger grants to fewer numbers of programs. We haven't gone out to programs and rebid for slots and done that. We haven't done that. But this is the cost of that, right? Is the slots cost more now than they did 10 years ago. They cost more now than they did 2 years ago, but we have held slots constant. So what we did this year, looking at it, was we held FTE constant. And so that meant, somebody's not gonna have to go out and hire a 0.2 home visitor to serve those extra 4 families. But if somebody isn't serving those extra 4 families, it should be, the slots are kind of moving over to them. But if they, and so again, it was really, I think that the idea was born out of the PAT contracts meeting that programs were going to be losing slots. Essentially, they're losing slots, they're holding staff. So, but there's a lot of need in those communities, and so we wanted to see if there's a way to at least support that. Now, not all of our programs, as you can see, are hitting their enrollment targets. And in part, I would say that's because they're staffing, they haven't had, it's because our budgets haven't kept pace. So, but the whole thing is very complicated and nuanced, as you can tell. This has been a really amazing conversation and hearing all the insights. And I think it's just, we're in a position where we have to do some reorganizing our thinking, and it's not always welcome, or there's concerns about any approach.
Yeah, something in the chat.
Trisha said, I think today as an HVAC, we should discuss the idea of backing the idea that programs with 85% enrollment and have a reduction in slots should get first priority, and maybe vote on that. And then a comment from Alicia saying, I agree with this as HVAC.
So, and Trisha, you're forecasting kind of where we're headed, because the next slide here, yeah. Because the next slide is a request to vote.
So maybe at this point we open up to discussion. I hear an amendment from Trista for what the vote would be on, and perhaps there are others that have some ideas too. Can you put the slide back up that was just the one that you were on, the one that just showed the recommendation? And I don't know if we can live edit, but I might suggest removing the words regain slots in the slides as well. But there was a proposal to support the 85%, which needs to be updated in the slides as well, and then the priority for organizations that are losing slots as well. Those are the 2 modifications to the slide. Erica, go ahead.
I would just say, unfortunately, that doesn't meet the legislative intent of the budget. At that time, when the budget was passed, sorry.
No, just HVAC approving. Yeah. Okay, let's try and have one meeting.
I was just saying, unfortunately, prioritizing those programs that are losing slots wouldn't meet the legislative intent, because when the legislature passed that budget, they thought they were investing $8.5 million for rates and $1 million for expansion. So, and they clearly wrote for it solely for expansion. So I'm just saying it wouldn't meet the intent of what was in the budget.
But would it be expansion, because expansion is LIAs that already have a program that want to expand?
But if it's saying if it's programs that are losing slots,
so if you put a prioritization in there, then you're saying it won't meet it.
The way it's framed, I would say that probably doesn't meet, because the legislature intended to provide funding for expansion. I'm sorry, for rate increases to help support expansion. Unfortunately, there wasn't full information about that. Because at that time, the information was McBee was growing. Those numbers were projected off of what was coming out of the feds.
So here's my thought on that, Erica, is that like, I hear what you're saying 100%, and I can't argue that, and I'm sure that is absolutely the intent, and I trust that you know that based on, you know, the relationships you have in the legislature. What I can say is that the legislature does not understand how hard it has been to maintain our programs, especially for those of us who have been funded since 2011 and did not have any increases in two of the three funding sources in 13 years. Our McPhee didn't change in 13 years.
Totally, that's why they put 8.5, that's why they thought they were putting 8.5 million in, so I totally agree with you.
So Erica, do you have a recommendation on how that could be, how the wording could be structured?
Or, Erica, what I hear you saying is that your understanding through the process that you led, that there's $8.5 million that was believed by the legislature to increase the rates, plus another million
for and it says solely for
expanding of slots. So I think what I'm hearing is that there is a disconnect around what was anticipated to be 8.5 million of an increase to cover an increase in rates or to use the rate process.
And the reality is that didn't come to be, right? For these reasons. So therefore fewer slots. I don't know if it can be massaged in a different way, maybe, but I'm just saying if it's a kind of a switch out, if you will, that's a little too cute. It doesn't meet the intent.
So let's think about this. I don't know if this will help. On July 1st, the slot number is going to be 93 less. That's just, it is. There's no choice about that. We can't afford the slots the way that they are. I don't know what that is a whole thing I want to talk about. But so now we run an expansion in July and August and September, and we are going to get, you know, between, I don't know, 60 and 80 slots. So that it is an expansion from July 1st. It's not an expansion from now. It's still a contraction. And I don't, you know, so and yeah, that's all I'm going to say is that the current array isn't supporting the current slots.
But what I'm hearing is you can't tie that expansion explicitly to regaining those 93 slots, so that can't be a criteria.
So losing slots can't be, but can performance be a criteria?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I think another counter is this expansion was known about over a year and a quarter ago. Right. So theoretically, this expansion should have been in the works for
but it was also was mandated that we do it with rates.
No, it wasn't. Not in the budget. I mean, for your work, it made sense to you that it wasn't mandated by the legislature for that.
Well, also the legislature gave no staff to do it, and yet we're also mandating to do rates. I think at some point, I mean, I'm working a lot of hours a week and not doing an expansion, so I don't know who's going to do that expansion. So it's, at some point it's confusing to the field to be expanded. I mean, to do all of this all at once is a little bit much. So,
but it sounds like as long as it is not tied to these 93 slots that we know will be less, then using performance as a way to expand is okay. So if we modify what we're recommending to reflect that, then that meets or aligns better with legislation around expansion. I think
just can't be a switch out.
Yes, agreed. I think there is agreement on the not being a switch out. I just have to say that.
I wonder if you get around that by considering some sort of longevity. I know that you're looking at the two quarters for the last two quarters, right? But what if you look at longevity in the HVSA and sort of a consistent pattern over an extended period of time of high level work and whatever those metrics would be? I mean, I could make some suggestions. And here's why I suggest that is I think most of us who are, yeah, and I'm pitching this from sort of a selfish perspective, although I kind of think it's fair. I think most of us who are losing reduction slots, or who are having a reduction in slots, it's because we bid for those slots 13 years ago, you know, but so you don't tie it to necessarily, oh, you lost slots. You tie it to, these are long-standing programs that have shown a significant pattern of very high quality work. So maybe that's how you get around the idea that you're tying it directly to that. You're instead tying it to long-term, high quality work.
That sounds like a modification to this. So we have that as an option. We have the 85% meeting or exceeding 85% in enrollment.
They exist. Yeah, we have them. If you need them, don't worry about them.
Yeah. So it sounds like we have those two options as a way to think about expansion with the $1 million.
Sorry, just a reminder that our note taker is online and she has a hard time hearing if there's side conversations.
So it sounds like there wasn't the top bullet there around allocating a specific amount within the $1 million to help support a starter program. That didn't seem to raise any concerns or red flags. I'm checking, that was more of a statement, it should have been a question. Okay, that's fine.
Quite honestly, I didn't say this because I didn't know if that was like do you really want to bring someone new into this muck and mire? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know that this is the right ethical time to do that, quite frankly. I mean, I think that there are a lot of us who are white knuckling it right now with this situation. I will tell you that the rate situation has been a huge stress on me personally. I know it's been a huge stress for DCYF staff. I know it's been a huge stress for my staff as they've sort of been basically I told my staff, I don't know when we're getting a change in rates. I don't know what's going to happen. So this coming year, literally our budget is in total flux and we're going to have to like play every day by ear. And it's really stressful. And I wonder, just ethically, you guys can do what you want, but I just wonder, ethically speaking, is it okay to bring a new organization into this sort of situation when everything's up in the air? I mean, maybe what we do this time is we prioritize expansion, and then next time we prioritize startups once rates and everything has settled. But everything's up in the air. It's such a disaster right now. I don't know. It just doesn't seem ethical to try and onboard a whole new organization in the middle of this.
So along those lines, I'm thinking about the learning curve that happens with joining the HVSA, even if you're an established home visiting program, and then essentially learning to navigate state level funding and some of the reporting and other requirements of DCYF, which are very, specific. So somewhat along the lines of what Trissa was saying, I think there's a learning curve that high performing programs already within the HVSA have navigated. And I think their speed in being able to enroll families and get to capacity will be higher, faster because of that. The other thing I think that's important to keep in mind is that the rate setting process is going to introduce a lot of variability for individual organizations based on enrollment. So rather than getting a fixed amount every month of a 12-month contract, relatively fixed, it is going to be much more variable based on active enrollment and actively engaged families at that time. that's going to have to require a pretty sophisticated level of financial monitoring and forecasting and management. And that is a big learning curve in and of itself. So I think it's important to keep that in mind if you're onboarding programs that are new to HVSA, is that the variability and funding of rate setting also will be its own learning curve that takes a certain level of internal sophistication to be able to manage. I think it will be challenging for us, and we've been funded by DCYF for over a decade. So.
Thank you, Dila. Thank you, Trissa. So those are all things that we definitely do need to take into account. I think we're also looking at and balancing. There are places where we don't have home visiting programs, and it would be good to see if that's an opportunity to look at and to think of. So I think those are all the things that would come as part of the planning. Should we get an application from somebody who, or an area that we don't currently have a program, and we can support that. But all of those things that you have mentioned are critical pieces to keep in mind, and we have to look at and think about it as we select whoever that may be, if we get that opportunity, and as we structure support for them. So we appreciate both of those perspectives being shared, and we'll add that to the thought process. So as I'm looking at the expansion bullet there, because we want to get to a place where we can ask for, where we can vote. So we took the piece around replacing the 93 slots, that's off. We are now looking at performance. There was one around high quality. I can't remember exactly how that was worded. So if somebody could help support that, adding that to this possible, do we want to add that to this list, or do we want to stick with the 85 active enrollment? That's a pre-question to the actual voting question.
Some things in the chat.
There we go. Thank you, Laura. High quality long-term performance. Okay.
I mean, I think some of the rationale for the 85% was that programs are succeeding in holding families into the program, and there may be a lot of other indicators of quality. But if the point here is to get and fill slots, I think the programs that are getting and filling slots have documented that skill. And so I'm a little worried about other indicators of quality, because I feel like, well, at some point then it's probably gonna be, I think all of our programs have indicators of quality. So is the proposal everybody, or, how do you, how are we gonna get at that indicator quality without any more specifics than that? I mean, I'm interested in hearing what that might be.
Lisa raised her hand and there's a comment.
Again, what would your indicator of long-term quality be?
So let's hear from Alicia, and then you can.
I think that 85% enrollment could potentially demonstrate long-term quality. It seems like, to simplify where we're at right now, that if we were able to agree on that and move forward, that that in an expansion application, LAs that can then also demonstrate, why they're the best opportunity with their 85% or higher enrollment, that they would probably be the ones that would float to the top anyway. So it seems like, for simplicity, moving forward with this met or exceeded 85% enrollment and not trying to add in any other metrics would be helpful.
So in the chat, Dila said, I think retention is important related to high quality performance. And Trissa agreed. Maryland is still unclear about whether the expansion proposals meet the requirements of the legislator's intent.
Could you just leave it as expansion and not put anything there, so whoever applies and see
Absolutely.
what the applications even are?
Okay.
Does each
And then they would
take these one at a time or two votes?
If we're gonna leave it as expansion, there's no reason, there's no need to vote. Because that
And it was
be...
just a question. I'm just saying, like, why limit the applications? Why not see who applies and then look at all the things that have been brought up, like maybe who lost slots and where the needs assessments show that slots for expansion should be going. I think there's lots of things to consider.
We can only do that though if we have it only invitation to HVSA funded programs. We don't have the ability to apply the same criteria to programs not within our cohort. But yeah.
Or even to HVSA funded programs, but just leave out the 85% enrollment and just leave it open to all HVSA funded programs.
And if we did that, then yes, we would need to vote.
When is the expansion implementation timeframe?
July to August. Who's this? As soon as I get a person hired, you can help me. It's in July to August. I don't have any extra time.
Because I think as we shared at the beginning of this, there's some of this that's tied to a new individual who can help support, and we're in the process of hiring.
And it's tied to understanding where we're going with rates, because I cannot run a procurement without telling somebody how we're gonna pay them.
Right.
So I would not as an organization apply, and so that feels inequitable to communities to not know how we're gonna pay them.
So I think in July to August loosely is what I would say. So here's so I want us to get to a place where we can get this to a recommendation place that we can actively vote on. So it sounds like at this point, taking the 22 LIA's statement off this particular slide and the high enrollment performance, I would just say HVSA, it's an invitation that currently HVSA funded. And I think that is
up? Yeah. Well, and I guess that's my question is, are you saying only programs that meet that can even apply? Because I think the people that are looking at applications are going to be taken into consideration, like if they've been under enrolled for 10 years, right? Or can they not do that if you don't have that in here? Does that make sense?
If we invited to all HVSA programs with no criteria, then there's no criteria.
If you're moving toward, which you are, moving toward rates, which are going to have a payment based on serving families, you wouldn't want to encourage under-enrolled programs to apply.
Correct.
Because you're just further, you want to.
100%.
Yeah.
There's also a comment from Alicia, it would seem silly to me to give expansion slots to an org that is not regularly meeting their base enrollment guidelines.
And I would assume they wouldn't want to be applying
I
for
would
something that they'd only be getting 35%.
Having run 5 programs, that's not the assumption that people make when they decide to expand.
That was part of where that recommendation was coming from.
So I guess that's why I'm saying, that was my question about like, why even put it in there if it just is limiting people or creating a barrier, but that could be totally wrong.
Weren't there surveys sent out too for areas, or was this in the past, have they already been funded when you did the surveys of what communities were lacking any programs at all? Do we have some specific areas that are needing?
Right, we actually have communities in Washington State that have no home visiting, and they have no home visiting programs. And it's a fair amount, and like we've been working in Southwest Washington with Washington Gorge Assistance Programs to explore creation of a home visiting program there. There's no rush in terms of the work we're gonna have, but so yeah, it's because there's no, it's a nuanced work because in some communities there's no capacity to stand up home visiting. So the question is, how do we do that if there's very little in the way of service structure there at all? So yeah, there are a lot of communities where there is no home visiting, and there are also, you could argue, are a lot of communities where the need far outstrips the availability of services. So it's always it's a balance to try to figure out, are we gonna inject, in a very small population community, a relatively, an intervention that has a certain amount of cost associated with it for, to service a very small population community versus are we gonna inject more resource into a higher population community that has a huge, that the need is, the N is a lot more. It's just but because our footprint isn't deep really anywhere, and it's scant and non-existent if you look at some of our really extreme rural communities. So it's a hard, it's a resource question, really.
I do want to check in again, because it sounds like the invitation to currently funded HVSA programs would help address kind of what we're talking about, and maybe the scoring within whatever procurement pieces put together. There's some pieces that address some of the things that we're talking about. So if somebody had mentioned if a program is chronically under enrolled, that may be one of the things that we look at as we're scoring and looking at applications to determine whether or not that is an entity that's eligible for additional slots. So,
and the other thing to note is that when we run an expansion procurement or any kind of procurement, we bring in folks to do the review. We invite folks from here. Of course, if you're in LA outlying, we would reject your possibility of being an applicant to review. It was not us, I'm not scoring the applications, but what we do is offer guidance to the reviewers on things. If we do invite only HVSA programs, we can tell them, we can give them performance indicators that as another piece of information how to score. So even if we don't, we can or cannot invite, I mean, we can influence essentially by, telling people what their, performance has been. So that influences the panel, but the panel makes its decision. Yeah.
And I know, Trissa, you've got your hand up here. I'll come to you in just a minute, because I'm also noting the time that we have, and it seems like there's a lot that's kind of happening and a lot of different ideas and pieces that are coming up. And it may be valuable to just kind of have everybody take a deep breath. Let's, step away from this for just a second, and then we can regroup right before we get started for the other piece to check in and see if it's something that we want to vote on. So Trissa, did your comment have to do with what we're kind of chatting about right now? Is it something that?
Yeah, Renee said, what would your long-term metric be? And I like Delia's idea of potentially having it be retention. I'm sure DOH could pull those numbers on retention. I think that is because I think, yes, enrollment is important, but retention is also important, because ultimately our contracts say that we want at least 2 years of service. So I don't know exactly how that would be worded. I'd have to think on that. And obviously you guys might know that better than I, but I do think retention, and maybe we don't cut it off like, okay, if you don't meet this certain amount of retention or this certain amount of enrollment, you can't apply, but maybe people get more points for long-term enrollment and long-term retention, or those metrics. So you're not necessarily limiting who is applying, but you could make the 85% enrollment of at least the 4 quarters. You could make that a minimum requirement, and then maybe HVS or LAAs that have strong retention get extra points. So one would be used as a limiting factor, one would be used to give additional points when we're scoring, or something like that.
So we've captured that as well, Trissa, and so my hope is that we'll come back and we'll kind of group. It gives us some time to also look at and create a slide that's reflective of, I think, what we're capturing and what we've been talking about, and then we can do like a really brief check-in on this subject right after we have lunch and before we move into our subcommittee pieces. We also, while we were eating, we're going to have kind of a highlight or a discussion. Are you still geared up to do it, Samantha? Yes, no, maybe so.
No, can I be honest? I'm not.
Always. Okay, no.
No. I love that.
We accepted and studied it. We appreciate that. We appreciate that.
I've been wearing like 10 hats.
No, we're good. I appreciate your honesty and we support that. So why don't we regroup here? People can get their lunch. Our lunch here is coming. We'll connect 12:30. We'll connect back at 12:30. Go ahead. Sorry.
we'll connect back at 12:30, and then when it's, I have people that are coming just for subcommittee, I need to let them know, is it still 1 or is it
Yes.
earlier than 1?
No,
Okay.
it'll be, so we're just 15 minutes for people to do this, just a breather, people to get up, move around, we'll get back together at 12:30 and then we can wrap up. And then the,
We're doing the underspend at 12:30?
or, yes.
Okay.
We'll do the underspend at 12:30. And we'll wrap this things up as well. That's one of the things we've gotta do, so just give people a minute to step away.
Which major important topic are we talking about the next?
Nellie, this is Nina. Do I need to put in the link to the meeting, the workforce subcommittee meeting right now? Are people logging off or no?
No, nobody's logging off. We're just stepping away for a second and coming back together at 12:30. So nobody's logging off. We're just giving people a chance to get their lunch together. We'll get our lunch together here. Just take some deep breaths and we'll come back together.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking in about that.
No problem.
Looking at you there. There we go. So then it's not catching anything here. No.
Thanks for bringing up the whole situation.
Yeah, I hate to be the Debbie Downer on that.
No, I'm always the Debbie Downer, so I appreciate being a Debbie Downer. So that was always good to get kind of in your thinking, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
We just double check that
Hey, I just want to remind you guys that we can hear everything you're saying. So it's kind of up to you if you want us to.
It's muted.
We'll be sharing it all back, so we're kind of aggregate what we're hearing.
Hello?
If I could stand outside, can I get back in?
Yeah, you should be able to. Okay, I believe so. Awesome. There was, and I think somebody took the card that was here. Why is it they can still hear us? So you should be able to come back in, and you may cross paths with whoever's got the card.
Okay, so I can just, okay.
Yes.
Otherwise, the gal at the desk said, I don't mind how many times, it's gonna be great for my steps today.
I'm just curious, why can they still hear us?
Because those computers not muted?
That's weird, because that should mute everything. So we'll just a couple more minutes, but we are here and we'll get started.
The whole point is to be who you are and bring what you're bringing to being, right?
Okay, we are.
Yeah, absolutely, whatever you want to.
Yeah, I've got. All right, we're coming back together, and in that kind of 15-minute time chunk to.
I haven't used that one yet.
In the time that we took to get our lunch, we also took a little bit of time, both of us put our heads together to just see if we can better reflect the conversation and modify the recommendation. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a new kind of modification to this recommendation. So just want to get, does this capture where we were hoping to go? Is this a better reflection of this particular recommendation? So we've taken off the 85%. We are keeping the invitation to currently funded home HVSA programs. We're looking at retention and we're looking at enrollment. So I just give them be quiet for a little bit just to check in and see if this is reflective of where we've, like what we've discussed, and is a good summary and a way forward that we are comfortable with.
Krista shared that I like the information regarding expansion. Are we keeping startup? No judgment about that, just asking.
Great question. Yes.
Do you want to keep startup?
Then we can vote on it, right?
Mm-hmm. Are the two bullets being voted on separately or together?
We voted on together, unless you want to split them up. We talked about voting on them together. You want to split them up? You guys want to split them up?
For those online in the room, they're discussing if you want to vote on these together or split them up.
Let's say split them up. There's enough in there. Yeah. So we'll run to the same. I think just separate one out. If you can write expansion for one and startup, like expansion, startup, and then
Okay, wait.
expansion. But we can differentiate the polls later.
I think that makes sense.
So we'll vote separately.
So I'll call one expansion, call
one expansion startup.
Okay.
And then one just expansion. So we're just working on the poll, the two polls. Once they're up, there'll be one that is just expansion, and the one that's just expansion talks about the process. I don't know that I'm necessarily, it doesn't make sense to attach the money to it yet. The process, because the process can be followed with the entire $1 million or with startup separated. So the first, which one's going first?
Startup.
Okay. So the first one will be the startup voting. The second one would be the expansion, and the expansion one centers around the invitation to currently funded and then enrollment and retention. So it's not necessarily the dollar amount. That would make it
So the one that is open now is the startup.
Yeah.
Sorry, I realize it says expansion startup in the header, and then number 1 just says expansion, but that's expansion startup.
Yeah.
So include the
And then
recommendation is including
for so for voting, so I just want to stop. Are people clear on what this particular vote is for? Give me a head nod, a thumbs up. This one that is on the screen right now.
It's a little confusing. This is specifically about startup.
Yes.
Do we have funds set aside for startup in the next expansion procurement?
Yes.
Did the legislature specifically talk about startup, or did they say you guys could utilize it however you saw fit?
It just said expansion of home visiting.
Yeah, I dropped it in the chat too, Erica, sorry. It says solely for the expansion of home visiting. And I think the department has viewed a startup as expansion because it's expanding the footprint of visiting.
So to clarify, it does not necessarily indicate that it needs to include startups.
No, it does not.
It could, but it could, but does not indicate that specifically.
Home visiting services, yeah.
Any other questions about this first poll?
I'm sorry, I know you just said this, but this poll is voting for the expansion recommendation as it is on the screen right now with.
So we're doing 2 votes. The first vote is for the startup. So the first one you'll see that comes up will say expansion startup. And what that is we are going to allocate a portion of money out of this $1 million to support one startup program.
Should we do that?
Should,
okay.
Yeah.
Got it. I see the top. Yes, the top part of the
yes, then the second one will come up here in a second. So what we will do,
I just showed how to put.
Yes. What we will do in the room is we'll do a thumbs up, thumb sideways. Thumbs up means yes, thumb sideways means I could live with it. Thumbs down will be a no. And then the poll will pop up on the screen for those of you who are there virtually. Okay. So is it up?
It is up. So there are people who are voting online.
Okay.
If you're in the room, if you can hold your thumb up whichever way.
Is this vote only for members or
everyone? It's members only voting.
And it's home visiting
one. Yes. And within that, it's 1 vote per agency. So if there are multiple of you from one agency, it's 1 of you that votes.
Oh, I think I might have told that wrong to Katie.
But Katie's from a different.
Okay. Okay, so I have your vote. Yeah, so if you can keep it up and then put it down when I say I have you. Is that all the votes in the room? Yes, 3. Okay.
Yeah, for your members.
And then online we have 7 votes. So should be ready for you to end it and show. Yes. There, do you want to give a minute? Okay. All right, I'm gonna end it in 3 seconds. So if you haven't had a chance to vote and you're eligible, please do so. Okay. So what you're seeing now are only the online results. We also have an additional vote for thumb in the middle, and 2 additional votes for thumbs down. So
I love this group.
We have 3 votes for thumbs down, 5 votes for thumbs in the middle, and 3 votes for thumbs up.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna move on to the. We had a voting slide, but I think it's doing this makes more sense than having the voting slide.
Okay, and now I will open the other poll.
And this other poll is for the second bullet. I don't think it's a focus specifically on the number, but it's more of the content around invitation to currently funded HDSA programs and the 2 criteria, the bullet right below. So approving those 2 things in combination. So the poll is out there. In the room, thumbs up, yes, thumbs middle, I can live with it, thumbs down, no.
Okay, I got all the votes in the room.
For those of you online, the poll is up. So if you could take a minute or so to get that completed, that'd be great. And then Laura, when we're done with this, we'll move on to the fund balance.
We need 5 more seconds.
Same slide, so it's really good.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Okay, so what you're seeing are the online votes only. We had 3 in-person votes, thumbs up, so that takes the total to 7. 7 votes to move forward. 3 votes can live with. 1 vote can't approve.
All right. I just want to say thank you. We worked our way through that. I appreciate everybody sharing their perspective and their thoughts. And for sticking with it. For sticking with it until we got to something that we could put together that was reflective of everybody's perspective and then an opportunity to vote on it. So we'll transition to the next item. The next slide. Oh, sorry. One more.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is Laura from DCOIA. I am doing our second of 2 required updates on the home visiting services account underspend. We did our last report in October. So this, what you see here is the kind of what was noted in October, and the next, in the next slide, you'll see what was projected, what's projected for the end of the year. So no, let's keep it here. Go back one more. Let's keep you here for a minute. Thank you. Sorry about that. Emily, I'm throwing you off. I wanted to just do a little bit of background here. Erica, this goes to a little bit what we were talking about earlier and is fairly technical and in the weeds, but the home visiting services account is specifically a dedicated account in the state treasury. It differs from general fund state because funds in the account stay in the account until there's some kind of action. So the legislature directs them elsewhere, things like that. Whereas programs that are funded by general fund state, the money reverts back into the general fund every year, and certainly at the big end of the biennium. It kind of depends on how it's budgeted. But either way, what's happened over the last few years of the home visiting services account, both due to expansion as well as transition into the new Department of Early Learning to Department of Children, Youth, and Families, there was an increasing balance in the account that we were needed to do work with the legislature to act on to change our statutory limitations on how much we can actually spend from the account. So I think it was in FY like 19 or 20, we noticed this and we said, oh, shoot, well, the legislature dictates to us we can only spend a certain amount of money, and what was in the account exceeded what we were allowed to spend. So we had to request additional authority from the legislature to allow us to spend this funding beyond what was previously allowed. It took us a couple years within the department to even sort that out. But when we did, the legislature gave us an additional $1.5 million each year in order to kind of chip away at these funds. And we've done so in connection with you all, communicating with you both what our plans are for spending those down, getting input and votes in some cases, including this year, as well as kind of trying to make sure that we're proceeding on spending those funds so that they don't get swept and used for something else. Basically, wouldn't want the legislature to take them away from us. So this year in October, we spoke with you all about our plans for what we think we could use them for this year. In the interim, because we weren't able to implement rates on January 1 due to how complicated this process has been, we ask you if you would support us in utilizing some of these funds for our second round of workforce appreciation incentives, which went out in January through March, as well as the 7% contract adjustments or increases that started in January as well. So that's what we discussed with you all a few meetings ago now. And then as a result of that, now you can flip to the next slide, Emily, or whoever's doing slides. Sorry, I'm not sure who's doing it. Thank you. And as a result of that, we have chipped away at the balance. We're projecting at the end of this year about a $1.2 million balance within the account. That might fluctuate a little bit. It, of course, it depends on spend, which for us, we don't, we can kind of guesstimate what our underspend might be, but this is basically projecting that most of our contracts will spend out. So it may be a little bit higher at the end of the year than this, maybe up to 1.5, but right now with support of our budget office, they're helping us with this projection of $1.2 million as of close. So June 30th, well, really we close in like August, but end of fiscal year is June. So with that, B2F anticipates and has included this $1.2 million balance in our rates planning. So in all of our budgeting for how we will be able to issue rates, we've included this $1.2 million integrated into rates this first year. Again, that's assuming we're going to have to ask for additional funds to fully implement rates in the future. But at this point, we have considered at the end of this year in state fiscal year 25, we do anticipate utilizing the funds for rates. So I just wanted to note for you all, we are back down to close to our FY18, a little bit lower FY18 balance is what we're projecting at the end of this year. Those numbers really won't finalize until about August or September after all the invoices come in and everything clears and that kind of thing, but that's what we're projecting at this point. So there's nothing to vote on or anything at this point. I just wanted to share with you an update of where we're at and what we think will happen next year as a result of this available balance for supporting rates implementation as well. So I'll pause there and see if that's all the slides I had. It was just two, and happy to take questions or discussion, comments, whatever at this point.
This is just totally a curiosity question. How many, do most LAAs spend down most of their budget each year, or does it, I don't know, is there a ballpark amount that generally comes back? I'm just curious.
Well, it doesn't really come back because it never leaves the department if we don't get billed for it.
I said that the wrong way. I mean that,
yes.
That you don't have to pay out, I guess is what I'm saying.
It depends. The pandemic years, the 2 years of pandemic really impacted that a little bit, Trissa, but before and then since then, it tends to be between 2 and 5% each year that's underspent by LAAs. And, with our increasing budget, that's, now that's a higher impact when it's 2 to 5% versus before when it was 2 to 5%, it was a lower impact, lower numbers, lower impact, of course, but that's tended to be what it is. This year, we already have some contracts that are already spent out all the way. So it kind of really depends on staffing and those kinds of things for organizations, because if they don't have staff, they can't bill us. So yeah, so that's kind of what the last few years has been. 2 to 5% is about our contracted underspend.
COVID had a really strong impact on the numbers, which is partly why you can see they went up. When a lot of our nurses were redirected to doing COVID response, and so we weren't getting billed. So programs underspent. But yeah, now we have a number of programs who in their April invoice spent all their allocation, even with the 7%.
Any other questions on the account balance? Thanks, Laura. So we're gonna do some regrouping. As you can see, we're down to 10 minutes. This was a really good conversation, a really good use of our time together. So I do want to focus, this is our last meeting for this fiscal year, so we need to do some planning for the next state fiscal year and meetings. So we will, again, table our conversation around roles and a conversation around what we wanted to dive into value-wise. We could do that. You can go to I might want to Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Stop, back up one, back up again, back up again. Sorry. There we go. So, just looking at the suggested meeting schedule for state fiscal year 25. So proposing having a meeting in August, and that meeting would help us kind of do some conversations around expansion as we're thinking about the general funds expansion, but also 6109. So that would be an opportunity to do that. And then an opportunity to do some planning for state fiscal year 25 in regards to topics we want to see, just really looking at and thinking about topics per meeting. Would love to get us into a structure, really thinking about what we want to dive into and talking through what we should be as we talk about some of the budget pieces. So there's 2 times a year that we want to do that. So really thinking about kind of mapping out what we want to see. But I also would love to have a conversation about kind of roles, so that and HVAC's role in recommending or kind of what that structure would look like, so that we're going into this next state fiscal year with a full kind of clear understanding that I think will help get us to where we want to be as an advisory committee. So just want to gather some thoughts and hear your feedback on the schedule that's up there. And looking at it and trying to figure out I know August is a travel time. We're not going to be ready, I think, to do anything expansion update wise in July, realistically. So and September seems a little too long.
You mentioned 6109. Were there updates related to expansion there?
Yes, not expansion. It was did I say it wrong? It's the contracted slots for home visiting. Yeah. So we're in the planning phase. Okay. So we're pulling together right now. In the email, just sent out our brief update as to where we are. We're identifying locations, really looking at training and figuring out who a provider would be for that, and doing the procurement process of starting to think about that. Also, referral process. Build that out as well. So the work on that is continuing. We feel like in August we'd be able to, here's where we're at, here's what we're planning to do, and the same thing for the expansion with state funds.
It feels like those two should be kind of coordinated, since a program might go 9 eligible, or you know what I mean, that might influence their decision to apply for other expansion, or it might not.
Thanks for that question, Erica. And the other thoughts or questions?
I think it's good. I think it's good to talk about 6109 sooner rather than later. I know I said this last meeting, so I won't go into it now, but I just have deep concerns about if it's going to be the same rate as the rates we have, or as it's going to take a lot more engagement, a lot more training. And the other significant concern I have about it is its impact on the model of fidelity. So do you guys have I'm assuming start early is in some of those meetings so they can really speak to some of that, that technical aspect. I think it would be really good if you guys had LAs or start early in that room when you're discussing those things, because I'm going to be really honest on its face right now. I've already told my boss I'm not interested. If Yakima was identified as a county, I am not interested in those slots. I can't speak for any other LAA program. I'll just say, as it stands right now, what I know about it right now, I think a lot of leaders might feel the same way I do.
So Trista, there isn't any external kind of planning at this point, because we have structures we need to put in place so that there is a space and a place for feedback to come into. But yes, our plan is to engage and involve as many people as we can in the development of this. So yes, to that, we are not at that place yet. And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking more 10 to 12 in August than 10 to 11.
My recommendation is just before August 22nd that we're not the first line of feedback or engagement or support in structuring that on August 22nd, that you've already engaged other people to inform that conversation. So if on the 22nd you're asking us to vote for something, you've already had those discussions.
And can I just say, if start early, if it's possible for us to be involved, we would very much like to be involved.
Received. And yes, Trissa. Yes, Liv.
Thank you.
So the modification I would make to this slide is August 22nd, 10 to 12. I think that would be a more realistic.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Any other questions about this particular slide? We have 4 minutes, and again, thank you for giving up your lunch, because you gave up your lunchtime for us to continue the conversation. It's been a really good year. I think a lot of good conversations and work and recommendations have happened, and really appreciate your commitment. This is a huge chunk out of all of your days to participate, and really value being engaged and sharing your perspectives, and appreciate providing your perspectives that are different than ours as an agency, and pushing back. All of those things are welcome. I think that's the only way that we grow, the only way that things shift. And again, look out for some mascot stuff. We'll have to.
I'm headed to buy my t-shirt.
So we'll figure out how we can continue to use the mascots we came up with today during the next time that we are together. So we have subcommittees coming up. There's a subcommittee. Now I think is a good time, Nina, for you to put the link in the chat.
Nina is out, but I just dropped it in. Nina had to start meeting with Butler. If you're going to workforce subcommittee, you can follow me. It'll take us a few minutes to get the owl set up.
All right.
And I will.
Okay, so we are going to break. Thank you again so much, and we'll see you in August. Hope that your summer between now and when we regroup on the 22nd goes well. Again, thanks for your commitment and sticking with it. Today we had some tough conversations, and appreciate you sticking and working through it. I hope you have, those of you who are not going on to subcommittees, have a great rest of your day and your week. Bye-bye. The subcommittee for data is in this room.
Is someone online to let people in?
I can.
Soraya is
Yes.
on.
Oh, okay.
Co-host is Soraya.
I have hosting privileges.
Thank you.
Of course.
Martha and Nellie.